Hello children, today we shall talk about the outbreak of the revolutions which was happened in France in 1789. So dear children, in our previous classes we had the discussions with you that there was a subsistence crisis that was taken place in France due to several factors, due to increasing of populations, increasing of price rate, not increasing of wages of the common peoples, crop failure. This resulted the French society to come into the street because there was a great crisis which drained the financial conditions of France. Apart from that, when Louis XVI came into power, he found the empty treasury. To his surprise, he inquired that why the treasury is empty. Then he came to understand that due to the continuous war with other countries and due to the war loan which was nearly $1 billion levels, which drained the financial conditions of France. Apart from that, dear children, we see there was a costly palace at Versailles, and for its maintenance and also the maintenance of the government, the France government has to have they need to have more money in order to run the government, in order to maintain the palace that was at Versailles. So in order to maintain all these, there is no other options which is left to King Louis XVI. So in order to maintain all these government officials as well as to pay back the loan amount that was taken during the time of war, here there is no other options which is left to the kings, to the newly kings, King Louis XVI. So here the king, the monarchy cannot directly impose taxes on the peoples. In previous classes, dear children, we have learned that the first estate and second estates, these two groups were exempted from paying taxes to the government. Only the third estate's peoples were paying taxes to the government and they were having financial burden here. So here the monarch, he is not having the right to increase directly tax on the peoples, and for that he has to call the meeting here. He has to call the meetings of the political body of these three estates, and the last meeting was held in 1614. So on 5th May 1789, Louis XVI, he called together an assemblies of the states to pass the new taxes. At the Palace of Versailles, we see the delegates from these three estates were presented there. They were selected on the basis of elections, and after the delegates were made to go to the general assemblies, the elections was held, and in that elections we see 300 representatives from first estates and second estates and 600 representatives from the third estates. And in the third estates, dear children, we understand that the rich as well as the educated and prosperous peoples can represent, or they can be part of the delegates of this General Assembly. So as we understood that there were 300 representatives from first estates and second estates, and 600 representatives from the third estates. So here the common peoples like the peasants, the artisans, the women, they were denied to get into the assemblies. They were the most common peoples, so they were not allowed to entry into the assemblies. But all these artisans, these peasants as well as women, they had written their problems as well as their grievances in the letters, and the letter was nearly 40,000, which contains the grievances and problems of the peoples that was carried by the representatives. So here, when the peoples of the third estates were proposing to go with more delegates to pass their demands in the assemblies, but the king, he proposed to go with the old principles of one vote from each estates. So here the king said that he is willing to go with the old principles. And what is that old principles? The old principles says that one vote from each estates will be elected to the general assemblies. So here the third estates peoples, they were keep on demanding to have more delegates so that their demands will be approved in the general assemblies, and they were knowing about the social contract between the peoples as well as the representatives from the book which was written by Rousseau, and the book name is the Social Contract. So dear children, here different philosophers during that time, they inspired the peoples greatly to fight for liberty, to fight for freedom, to fight for equal representatives. So through their writings, they were greatly inspired, and they were willing to go with having more delegates in the assemblies. But the kings who rejected their ideology, who rejected their demands, and he said that he will go with the old principles of having one delegates from each estates. So dear children, when the king rejected the demands of the third estates peoples, they were depressed, they were very sad, because they were the peoples were facing lot of challenges in the society, and when their demands were rejected by kings, then they started revolting against the kings, came out of the assembly with anger, and they thought of doing the revolt against the kings, because here the problems are really faced by the common people. So here the representatives from the third estates, they began to declare that they are the peoples who will understand the situations of France, because they are the peoples who will change the situations of France. And on 20 June, the representatives from the third estates, they begin to declare at assembly that they will not come out until they frame the constitutions for France. And further, these common peoples were greatly inspired, and they were greatly enabled with the ideas of Mirabeau as well as Abbé Sieyès. These two peoples who greatly supported them through their ideologies. And here the Mirabeau, who said that we need to end the privileges of the noble groups as well as the clergy groups who are there in the society. So here the Mirabeau said that the privileges based by birth needs to be abolished, which are enjoyed by the first estate and second estates. And the Abesius, he said that we need to understand, or he written in the pamphlets, that what is the first estates. So he inspired the peoples to understand the situations of the first estates, because in France the first estates peoples are comprising 90% of populations. So these powerful speeches made by Mirabeau and Abesius, who enabled the peoples to gather at Versailles, and they started framing the constitutions for the whole France country. And while they were formulating and framing the constitutions for the France during that time, the rest of the peoples who were going through a very hard time, because there was a very bad winter, and here the bad winter, it represents the bad situations here. So it talks about the bad harvest. It is also meant that the increasing of price rate, all these situations which stalk the peoples of the France society here. So during those periods, there was crop failure, bad harvest, increasing of price rate, limitations of the wages which are received by the common peoples. So all these economic situations which was stuck the common peoples in France society during the period of 17th centuries. So when these peoples were stuck, they were making a queue in order to get the piece of bread, and they were standing in long queues for hour and hour, and they got very angry because the situations was very painful here. When the situations was very painful, they got very angry. They went towards the Bastille. They destroyed the Bastilles and they sold the fragments in the market to keep it as a memory. So here the common peoples were very angry at the ideas of increasing taxes and imposing taxes on the common peoples, because the peoples are really facing more problems in the society, that is such as crop failure, then increasing of taxes, then also the bad harvest. All these situations which made the peoples to be very angry at the kings. So they went towards the Bastilles, they destroyed the Bastille jail, they sold the pieces of Bastille jails so that the peoples will keep it as memory in the society. So apart from that, dear children, there was a rumor as well as the news which spread all throughout the villages of France society, that the manor or the tax collector who had hired the bands of brigands to destroy the crops of the peoples. So here the angry peoples, when they began to heard about the rumors that the manor, one who is collecting the tax from the peoples, had hired the group of individuals to destroy the crops of the peoples, they went towards the Chetaks, the resident of the manor, burned down the documents, burned down the records of the manorial dues, and they forced the manor to leave the villages leave the places where they were living. So during that time we see that why the entire people of France were angry at king, because the king is imposing taxes on the common peoples, and during that time the common peoples are really going through a very hard times. So when there was a heavy financial burdens on the common peoples, because during that time they were going through having crops failure, going through the very hard time, such as increasing the price rate, then paying the manorial dues, that made the peoples to start the revolts by going towards the Bastilles. And they said that they are no longer going to abide by the rules which are enacted by the kings here. So dear children, so faced with the revolt, the king finally he recognized the National Assembly, and he said that further on his powers will be checked by the constitutions. So when the revolt was continuously becoming very bad in the society, during that time finally the kings Louis XVI he recognized the National Assembly, and he said that his powers will be further checked by the constitution. So dear children, when the revolt was continuously against the monarchy, finally the monarchy is accepting the demands of the common peoples, and he is giving recognitions to the National Assembly and saying that further his powers will be checked by the constitutions which are made by the common peoples as well as the General Assembly of France. So dear children, on the night of 4th August 1789, again the assembly they passed the decrees of abolishing the feudal systems as well as different kind of taxes which are paid by the common peoples. And we understand that the members of the clergy communities were also further give up their privileges which they were enjoying during the time of monarchy, and that is such as collections of tithes which was abolished by the assembly, and the lands which are owned by the churches it was seized, and as a result the government they acquired the assets of 2 billion livres. So dear children, here in the outbreak of the revolutions we understood that why the peoples they started the revolutions movements here. What was the causes? There are so many causes, such as increasing the taxes on the common peoples, because the common peoples are going through a very hard time. They are not enjoying any kind of social privileges. They are paying taxes to the government. They are not enjoying privilege based by birth. They are facing lot of challenges, that is such as crop failure, increasing of taxes, increasing of price rate in bread. So all these situations which made the peoples to be angry at the kings, and when they got angry at the kings they started the revolt movement against the king, and they limited the powers of the king and they established the constitutional monarchy. So this is how the outbreak of the revolutions which happens in France during the period of 1789. Thank you so much, my dear children, for listening to me.